Hi, my name is John, and welcome to another edition of Statistics Quest. The baseball season, as most of you know, has been delayed. Hopefully it'll be played sometime this year, or hopefully it'll resume sometime. But in the meantime, I wanted to look at least one of the aspects that there is disagreement on with Major League Baseball and the Players Union, and that is how salary is related to wins, okay? Which everybody kind of knows that, but I'm going to take a further look, and I'm also going to include something I call interest in analytics as also a potential factor in wins, okay? So I looked at the seasons 2016 to 2021. I skipped 2020, okay? That was the shortened baseball season. So there are actually 5 seasons, and I did this by individual seasons. So 5 seasons, 30 teams, that's 150 actually seasons where you have wins. And so what I did was I ran a regression for those 150 observations where I had 2 independent variables, namely the team's salary, along with what I call statistical interest and its relationship to wins. Okay. By the way, I'm going to break this into 2 parts. Hopefully keep it about 10 minutes each. The second part will be some of the more advanced analytics. So I'm going to kind of brush through that a little bit in this first session, just kind of get to the highlights. And then the second part, I'll delve in to a little more of the more advanced analytics. So if you wanted to check that out or maybe learn some things in basic statistics, that would be great also. Okay, so I ran a regression model and I found that both of these are very significant with wins. I also looked at the relationship between salary and statistical interest, and that the correlation was actually, I believe it was 0.14, which is not significant at the 0.05 level for those of you who understand significance levels. And the point, it's very important to look at that because you not only get into the idea of collinearity, but you also get into the idea that, you know, some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, salary is related to wins. And if you have a bigger salary, you're more likely to pay for more statistical people, etc. So they're all kind of intertwined, so to speak. But the fact that these were not strongly correlated and that they both came in very significant says something about this statistical interest. Now, how did I determine this? There was an article written back in 2015 by a gentleman named Ben Baumer. It was a special for ESPN. And he actually ranked the teams in kind of in order of their statistical affinity, okay, or their interest in getting statistically minded people to do analytics. He actually bucketed them into 5 categories. I rebucketed them into 3 categories and gave a 0, 1, and a 2 for the least interested to the most interested, respectively. Okay, cutting to the chase. The coefficients for the model, the intercept was about 63, okay, 62 point something, we'll call it 63. The salary coefficient, and this would be in millions, so millions of dollars, was about 0.09. And the statistical interest was about 6.68. So how do we interpret this? How do we use this? Okay, well, let's just assume we have a team with a $100 million payroll, and their statistical interest is a 1, which puts them in the middle of the pack as far as their interest goes. And again, this you can check out the article for yourself. He actually did his due diligence. I think he talked to people, did some studies and so forth. So I think he came up with a pretty reasonable, way to rank each of the teams as far as their statistical interest. So anyway, getting back, team with a $100 million salary, and they're considered a 1 statistically interested, and we wanted to predict their wins just from that. So we would have predicted wins is equal to 63, that's the intercept, plus 0.09, that's the coefficient for salary, times 100, because it's 100 million. Notice this salary is already in millions. So if it's 100 million, I would only substitute in 100 there, because it's 100 million, plus 6.68 times 1. That's approximately equal to 63 plus this is 9, that's 72, plus 6.68, so that's 78.8 wins, okay? Now, the gist of basically all of this is to suggest that this is a big driver and something that I think some teams are still overlooking. You look at a team like the Tampa Bay Rays, who are perhaps number 1 in emphasizing statistics and so forth, analytics. The Boston Red Sox, also, many of you probably watched the movie Moneyball. The Oakland A's were kind of the forerunner of that. The Red Sox, you remember at the end of the movie, actually, the Red Sox wanted to get Billy Beane. At the time, I believe they had a young Ivy League graduate named Theo Epstein, and he ended up going on to the Cubs. They ended up winning, but the Red Sox, I think they hired Bill James. They hired a couple others. So they were one of the ones with the 2, that were high. Again, the Astros or another team. The Tampa Bay Rays recently, they went to the World Series during the strike-shortened year on, I believe, the 3rd lowest salary in baseball. Okay.
Sorry.
So teams like the Astros, the Rays, they are taking advantage of these statistically minded people. So just for fun, let me actually put this back here. So notice this equation. This predicts, right? We can use this equation in words. It's the intercept plus 0.09 times the salary in millions plus 6.68 times whatever category they fall into. So just for fun, I looked at the 2022 salaries. Along with the 0s, 1s, and 2s for statistical interest. And I predicted the number of wins for each team. Now, something to keep in mind. This is just 2 things, right? I am not suggesting this is the best way to predict the number of wins for a team. In fact, it isn't. Probably the best way to predict the number of wins, which many statisticians do for both sports books and teams, is to do player projections, etc., based on the player personnel and so forth, right? So if you're familiar with like over-unders for season wins, and they have, let's say the Pittsburgh Pirates at 73 wins, they've done that primarily with player projections, okay? Now, very often these things are related. In other words, whatever the player projections predict, these variables that I am showing you will predict, okay? But one kind of feeds off of the other. Very often what happens is a team with a big salary that are statistically minded, maybe like the Yankees or Red Sox or Dodgers, they're going to have talented people. And so the talent itself is going to predict a high number of wins, okay? So I want to make sure that, everybody understands I'm looking at this in a vacuum, okay? It's not the best way, but it says a lot about, not so much salary, we already knew that, about statistically inclined teams. Well, just for fun, I made a prediction, as I started to mention, for the wins for every team and I assumed that if they won 90 games, they made the playoffs. And if they made the playoffs, I made it real simple. I gave them the same probability of winning the World Series. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but directionally, I think it works out to be pretty good. By this method, the Yankees actually had the highest predicted wins, which was about 95. The Orioles had the lowest, which was about 65. And I found their probability, again, you can use the normal distribution. I'll mention this in the second video, on winning 90 games and thus making the playoffs. And then I gave them all the same chance of, as I said, winning the World Series. The team, so just to see the ranges, a couple examples. The Yankees had about a 9% chance of winning the World Series. They were number one. Number two was the Red Sox, which was about 7%, and so forth. So, and then you get down to the Orioles. They had about a 0.2% chance, which is 0.002, which is about 1 in 500, actually a little bit better than that. In actuality, I think it's much lower than that. This actually projects them to 65 wins. It doesn't take into consideration several things. Number one, as I said, talent. They've been very dearth of talent the last several years. Second thing is, ironically, they play in probably the toughest division in baseball, which makes things even harder. But anyway, so I didn't look at schedule or anything like that, but this is just kind of a quick fix look at projections. And again, in the second episode, I will look more. I will explain some of the statistical things that I did not explain here. So for those statistically inclined, or even if you're not, I would ask you to tune into that. I'll also try to keep that to about 10 minutes. The main takeaway I wanted to make from this is not only is salary a big thing, but you teams that are not so inclined, like I think the Philadelphia Phillies and Miami Marlins, in fact, they may have been the two lowest teams by this gentleman's article about 7 years ago. I don't know if things have changed, but anyway, you better get on your horse and start putting an emphasis on statistics because it means something. Thank you, and see you next time on Statistics Quest.